everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Castle Podcast. I'm Rachael Kriger. I'm back this week. Last week, Owen had a really solid interview with Josh Yohe of The Athletic, so that's great. If you haven't had the chance to listen to it, go ahead back in and listen to that. I'm pretty sure that was episode 20 of this podcast, which is like, oh my God, crazy. So forget me freaking out about being sentimental about this podcast. We're back and we've got friends joining us. We've got Owen back this week, and we have Cody is back from the depths of the retail world at Hobby Lobby. So how are you guys doing?
I'm good. It's been a while. I've been really jonesing to get on this podcast finally. I just bought a brand new microphone the other day, only to find out that I can't use it yet because I haven't bought all the parts that I need for it. So that was kind of a disappointment, but we're here and I'm ready to talk about the Penguins for sure.
Well, you still sound great, so don't worry about it. Owen, I know I pretty much talk to you like every week now. So this week, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. Continuing to grind away. Junior in college, same old stuff. Got a career fair tomorrow. What I'm looking forward to. We'll be talking to some future employers, hopefully. So, wish me luck.
Oh, the career fair. I remember that. That was fun. The career fair is how I got my first job as a copy editor at the Herald Standard newspaper, which was, even to this day, probably the best job I've ever had in my life. So, shout out to my Herald Standard family. But I'm glad you guys are doing well. Happy Fat Tuesday, because we're recording on Fat Tuesday, and this pod is going to drop on Ash Wednesday. So all my fellow friends, happy Lent. Go get some fish. Fish Fry Fridays are back, my favorite time of the year. I have a list, if you guys ever want to know of a good fish fry around the Pittsburgh area, I got you covered. But we're not here to talk about fish. We're here to talk about sports. So we're just going to get right into it. I'm going to chat about the Riverhounds for a hot second here. So the team, the biggest joke with the Riverhounds is that Bob Lilly loves to sign former Rochester Rhinos players. And I think somebody needs to check on Bob Lilly because the team made 5 new signings in the span of, I think, 3 weeks now. And none of them are former Rochester Rhinos. Save your gasps, save your applause. But 2, and this is the fun part, 2 of them have some MLS experience. And with that, I have to shout out my friend Matt Pollard over at Last Word on Soccer, because we just love stealing things in Pittsburgh from the Colorado Rapids. We stole Rabbi Mark Goodman, who now is on the Pittsburgh Soccer Now team, from Colorado, and now we've stolen Josh Gatt, who's a former Colorado Rapid. So Matt, sorry, but we just really love stealing your stuff. Alex DeJean, who played for Orlando City SC and was part of the complete chaos that was the MLS's back tournament last year, is now with the team. So another notable player that got signed is Ezra Armstrong. He's only 22 years old, but he went pro at 17, going with Swope Park Rangers in the USL, which is the affiliate of Sporting Kansas City of MLS. He was over in a lower division team in Germany and a Danish team as well. So now he's back in the States. He is with Pittsburgh. He's a young player, but he does have that experience since he did go pro at 17. So I'm excited to see what he's going to bring to the back line because he's a defender. And then just a small little update here. I didn't write about it for Pittsburgh Sports Castle like I did with the roster update. Oh, by the way, Danny Rivera was also re-signed. I wrote about it for a different outlet, and it was just one of those things that I just couldn't write about it twice because it was hard to kind of change the words. So if shameless plug, if you do want to see more in depth, go to Sounder at Heart. I'll attach a link in the show notes. But the U.S. Open Cup is a tournament that the Riverhounds take part in some capacity every single year. There's usually 101 teams spanning across a bunch of different leagues and tiers in American soccer. There is obviously tier 1 is MLS, tier 2 is the USL, and then so on and so forth. So there's usually 101 teams. They didn't compete last year because of COVID-19. This year they are planning to have the tournament, but it is going to look very, very different. Instead of 101 teams, they're whittling it down to only 28 teams. So the reason why this is relevant is because there are only 8 teams from the USL Championship, which is where the Riverhounds play, out of 24 eligible teams that are competing. And I say 24 eligible teams because there are some teams that are affiliates of MLS teams that aren't eligible to compete because, for example, the Tacoma Defiance is partnered with the Seattle Sounders, and some Tacoma players sometimes play for the Sounders. So they kind of share players in a way. So there's 24 eligible teams in the USL, and 8 of them are going to be in the Lamar Hunt US Open Cup. The selection process has not been figured out yet. They're kind of figuring out, are they going to base it off of final standings, playoff brackets, PPG, points per game. They're still trying to figure that out. So we have no idea if Pittsburgh's going to be in, but it is relevant in the sense of there are only 8 teams from the USL that are going to be competing. So as soon as it gets updated, we'll definitely circle around back to that and see if Pittsburgh makes it in. I'm probably going to say they have a good chance of making it in. I'm not 100% sure. It's going to be an interesting tournament. It's only going to be 2 months, starting, I think, in May, maybe the end of May. So that's definitely something to keep a lookout for. And that's pretty much it for Rachael's Riverhounds news. So unless you guys have anything to add about the Riverhounds, we'll just jump right into the Pittsburgh Penguins. And they play, like I said, time of recording. This is Tuesday night. There was a game. So Owen, I know you watched that. So, what happened in tonight's game and just any immediate takeaways from the Tuesday night game?
I mean, it was kind of pathetic, the effort we had tonight, or they had tonight. If I'm not gonna lie, I mean, the first period we played pretty good. Had a couple good looks, good chances in terms of we got a 5-on-3 power play to start the game, so that was great. No capitalization until the third period, and really the story of the game is that the Capitals had 42 shots tonight, and Tristan Jarry looked great, but when you get shot on 42 times and when the Penguins only put up 27 shots, you're probably going to lose games, and that's what the Penguins did. Connor Sherry had his first goal against his former team, and the Penguins kind of just, it's concerning because when you look at the division that we're in, and obviously, things are different because of COVID, and every team hasn't played the same amount of games. It's still concerning when you look at the points that the Penguins have. The Penguins are 7-6-1 right now, so close to a 500 record, which is not something that any team wants. And this is going to be a tough year for the Penguins to make the playoffs overall. And if they keep playing like they do right now, they're not going to make it, in my opinion. It really looked like they were going to turn the corner on Valentine's Day. They had a really nice win against the Capitals. They led after 2 periods for the first time in the entire season. And that was I believe that was the 13th game of the season. And that was the first time the Penguins had ever led after 2 periods, which is a terrible statistic. You should never have that. And this game, the Penguins have trailed in every single game in the entire season. They've never led after, they never scored. They've been behind in every single game. They've had to come back in all of their wins. And while that has worked, while the Penguins have, 7 wins, a bunch of them came in overtime, a bunch of them came in the shootout. And you can't play like that every day, every game, especially in this division. And yeah, it's unfortunate.
And Cody, I know you said you were working tonight, so you didn't really get to watch the game, but just, I guess before we jump into some of the stuff we have on our notes, since we haven't had you on in a while, just kind of what have your thoughts been on the Penguins so far this season? And just, like Owen said, and he has said this on previous podcasts, this is kind of a different year for the team because I think everyone in Pittsburgh is so used to just immediate success because of the reputation that the team has. So just kind of, your thoughts on what this, and Owen has called it a rebuilding year multiple times, kind of teetering on, this is kind of the start of maybe something rebuilding. Just kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I said at the beginning of the year that I didn't think we were going to make the playoffs. I thought the Penguins were in a tough division. After last year, watching them lose to the Canadiens in the fashion that they did, it was ugly. And I don't believe that the moves that they made this offseason were enough to really push them forward. The captain move was a good move, but it just seems that some of the things that they've done this year and the line combinations they have just aren't gelling at the moment. It doesn't help when you don't have, all your defensemen are getting hurt in the fashion that they have. The top line is really starting to play really good hockey now. They've been the best line on the team for the past 3 weeks, noticeably just better. I mean, Malkin's starting to get a little bit better here, turning a corner. But, Zucker and Kapanen really haven't popped off on their line yet. I mean, Kapanen's had a couple nice goals. Zucker's had kind of a miserable year to this point. The Penguins did give up a lot to get him. First round pick was involved, and Penguins don't have a lot of that. And, losing your first round pick for a guy that hasn't really been all that productive is something that, I think these new guys in Hextall and Burke are going to look at. They want to rebuild the system a little bit. So they may not be as, they may not take as many risks as Rutherford did as far as first round picks. But as far as the team in general, it's kind of what I expected to this point. It's been a very mediocre season. I think you could argue that they're very fortunate to have the amount of points that they do to this point. They've been in a lot of situations where they haven't played well, and they were fortunately able to garner a point just by taking it to overtime. The problem is this season with, in most seasons, it's okay to, give a point and take a point when it comes to overtime. But this year, it's a lot harder to, go to overtime and justify it because every game you play is in division. So you're still gaining a point on that opponent. But at the same time, you can go to overtime in games against the Western Conference and give up that point because it's not as big a deal in the standings. This year, regulation wins, I think, are put at a premium because if you go to overtime, you give up a point. Even if you win the game, if you're chasing the Islanders, say, for the 4th seed, you may need a 3 or 4 point swing, and an overtime win's only going to get you 1 extra point towards that. So they've got to do a better job capitalizing in regulation going forward. And I'd like to see some more scoring out of, the secondary guys. I mean, Rust, Gensel, Crosby, those guys have been scoring. Crosby, not so much to an extent, but he's playing at the level you'd at least expect, and I think the points will come with him. But when you look at a guy like, McCann's hurt right now, but guys on that level, them not being in the lineup and them not scoring, their bottom 6, not really pitching in offensively, things just don't look good right now. I think, as far as Boston, Washington, and Philly, those look like the locks to make it. So I think it's really going to be a 2-team race between the Penguins and the Islanders. The Penguins are going to have to kind of make sure they play the Islanders tough and win a lot of those games here going forward.
Just a couple things to add on to that. In the third period tonight, Brandon Tanev switched up to the second line and Kapanen was put on the third line. So that was interesting. And Tanev turned over the puck and led to the third goal. And also, looking at the standings right now, the New York Islanders have 3 overtime losses. It's still 3 points, though, and now they're second in the East Division right now. It is kind of tight right now, just looking at it. And again, it's different because, the Devils have only played 10 games and the Islanders have played 15. But right now, your top 3 are Boston, the Islanders, Philly, and then Washington, then us in the top 5. Cody, I want to ask you a question, though. You mentioned how, the players aren't contributing, your bottom 6 aren't contributing, your depth guys aren't contributing. Who are the depth guys on the Penguins right now? Because do we even have them anymore? Like Teddy Bluger, yes. Do we even have a good bottom six? And tonight, Mike Sullivan benched his fourth line for the entirety of the third period. The third line tonight was Lafferty, Jankowski, and Sevier. I don't think that's a winning fourth line on any team. I don't think even those players are even NHL players. Do you think the Penguins should go out and try and acquire a bottom six forward? Because to me right now, I think the top six looks fine on paper. Kapanen, Zucker, Rust, Malkin, Crosby, Gensel. But your bottom six, Tanev, Bluger, who else is really my question.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of hard to justify that they even have a bottom six, like you said. Lafferty hasn't been good. Jankowski, I think he scored our first goal of the season, and ever since then,
yep,
he's
had
been
2 goals in like the first 3 games, and then he's gone. Drew O'Connor.
I mean, he's been he's been pretty much a non-factor. I mean, they're going to have to do something at the deadline. But at the same time, I think both of these guys, like Hextall and Burke said, they don't want to necessarily mortgage the future to risk it all now. I think they still want to be a contending team, but it's just going to be able to be acquiring these pieces without going too over the top to get them. And, the trade deadline is, there's always overpayments. For players at deadline, it's hard to acquire a guy at a price that you really, truly feel comfortable with. If the Penguins feel that they can compete this year, they're going to need a bottom six. And it doesn't seem like this combination of 6 guys they have right now is going to be good enough to push them to that point.
Good thoughts all around from you guys. A couple things that you guys had mentioned in there. The Penguins hired Ron Hextall and Brian Burke about a week ago. I am going to kind of jump around these notes that Owen had, because there were some things that, as we know, I'm not always up to speed 100% on the Penguins, but I do know the big names when I see them, and I do know the big talking points when I see them. And the biggest talking point, I think, in this list that Owen had is that Rob Rossi here in Pittsburgh had said that Marc-Andre Fleury could be coming back to Pittsburgh. And in that kind of, bubble, just talking about, trades and whatnot, Darren Dreger is how you say that? Darren Dreger says that Crosby could get traded if the Penguins miss the playoffs.
He said that. He said specifically it was in the context of it, because I don't want to, miscommunicate anything here, because this is obviously a huge, topic. He said that he could see Sidney Crosby talking to management if the Penguins missed the playoffs this year and saying to them, hey, trade me to the New York Rangers or the Colorado Avalanche so that the Penguins can get pieces and futures so that they can jumpstart a rebuild. It's not going to happen. I was, very displeased with that. And Darren Dreger's a great reporter, but and so is Rob Rossi, but I don't think either of them are going to happen. But, I still could see a big move happening here.
Well, I think if they could put the right price tag on Fleury, I could see it happening. Cody, do you see... I think we're all pretty much in agreement that Crosby's probably not going to go anywhere. That's your face of the franchise. I don't really see him slowing down right now.
He's still, a deal that he signed in 2000.
He's still the face of the franchise. He signed that deal in 2012, and it'll run until 2026. Great cap hit. No, he's not going to be traded. Right, exactly. But the Fleury thing, I think, is an interesting
the Fleury thing is interesting
point.
With, the tension that's going on between Vegas and him, and bringing in Robin Leonard last year in the playoffs. And is Leonard the new starter? They've been splitting games so far in Vegas. Fleury just had a shutout the other night. It's not like Fleury's playing bad or anything. But the names that I don't want to say realistically, could see getting moved. But like out of all of these big names that we're talking about, and when you get a new general manager, typically they make a big splash when they come in. Obviously, Jim Rutherford traded James Neal from Patrick Hornquist. That was his first ever trade that he made. Evgeny Malkin and Chris Letang, I mean, their names have been circling around in trade rumors ever since they were drafted. But I don't think you trade Malkin. But Letang only has 2 years left on his deal, if I believe. He's not had a great season. He's declining. And Pierre-Olivier Joseph, John Marino, Marcus Pettersson exist. Free agency exists. Cody, do you trade Letang, not this season, maybe next season, and get something before he walks on free agency potentially?
That's an interesting question. It's going to be nearly impossible to replicate what Letang has brought to this franchise for the past decade. And I still think truly the physical gifts are there with Letang. It's his mental lapses, I think, that have cost him and the Penguins a lot over the course of the last 4 or 5 seasons. I think that their best course of action probably would be to trade him unless they truly believe that they have a chance to win the cup here in the next few years. But I could very well also seeing them just have him play out his contract and let him walk in free agency. I think just for the sake of, it's going to be hard, I think, for management to sign off on a trade of Letang. I don't think, and not that it's the same as the Yager situation, and I'll get to that a little bit more with like the Malkin thing, but Letang's been a face of the franchise, along with Crosby and Malkin since his debut here. If management may not be comfortable making that decision, Mario had a firsthand experience with Yager and that whole situation. So making that move might not be the most comfortable thing for them, albeit it is a business. So if the Penguins feel they can recoup something of value for Letang, which I'm not really even sure what Letang's value would be at this point, to me, I think you'll see him play out his contract, and maybe he gets traded not this deadline, but next deadline next year, just depending on the season he's having. Me personally, I'd let him play his contract out and just let him walk in free agency because I really, truly don't know that anything you trade at this point is going to be of enough value to make a deal feel comfortable, unless you truly feel like you're getting a legitimate player back for him. I don't see I don't see that move happening, to be honest with you.
He's not in his prime anymore. As you mentioned, he's 32. His cap or his deal will expire not this offseason, but the next offseason. And yeah, I agree with you. I don't know what you get back for a guy like Chris Letang. But still, I don't want to let him, walk. He's the best defenseman in Penguins history, in my opinion. He has, the statistics to back it up. Paul Coffey may have been, the better player, but he didn't stick around as long as Letang has. And, like you said, he's been a franchise player. He's been the third cog. I always compare the Penguins to the Blackhawks, very similar. 3 cups in this era. They have Kane and Taze and Duncan Keith. And, the player that would probably leave the organization out of those 3 would be Duncan Keith, who's the defenseman in that situation. Same goes here with Malkin, Crosby, and Letang. I also actually did a video about how the differences in the paths that the Penguins and the Blackhawks have taken since they won those Stanley Cups have been. The Penguins never regressed, so to speak. Like they've made the playoffs, and while the Blackhawks have not. But you look at the Blackhawks now. They have guys coming in. Pius Sutter. He had a hat trick in like his 5th NHL game. They have a new goalie. I don't even know his name, but he might win the Calder, and Lankinen, that's his name. And they've been drafting, DeBrincat, and they got Strome in that deal with that Schmaltz deal. And I really, my motto for the Penguins right now is to do more of that, and that's what I'm excited for with Hextall, is that in 5 years that he spent with Philly, he was able to draft players, not necessarily, franchise changers, but, he drafted a Joel Farabee, who is looking pretty good this year. He drafted Travis Konechny, Ivan Provorov, and I really hope he can do that with the Penguins, so that, we can get those players to add to the Kane, Tays, and Keith, and in this case, the Malkin, Crosby, and Letang. So, yeah.
All good points all around from you guys.
One more thing. Let me ask you this, Cody. I don't know if you are really paying attention to the Blackhawks. I find them interesting because I compare them to the Penguins and kind of the Kings too. Because, the Stanley Cups, and then you regress. How do you get back up to that, mountain again, the Stanley Cup mountain? Cody, who do you think is closer to a Stanley Cup right now, the Blackhawks or the Penguins? I think it's the Blackhawks. I think they have a young team with still some veteran leadership. I think the Penguins are on their way down, and the Blackhawks are on their way up.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. The problem with the Penguins is, as you mentioned, youth and talented youth is what's going to take a team back to the promised land. When you look at the Penguins, the year that they won the cup, the first cup, they had guys like Brian Rust, who was younger, Tom Kuhnhackl, Connor Sherry. I mean, they had this influx, Matt Murray. They had the influx of younger players. And that's what, those guys are hungry. They want to win. They want to keep their spot in the lineup. So they play hard. And, none of those guys were necessarily touted as top prospects either. I mean, nobody really expected Brian Rust to become what he has. Tom Kuhnhackl provided a lot more than just being a fourth line scrub while he was here. Matt Murray came up here and dominated out of the rip. I mean, Jake Guentzel was the one guy that had legitimate pedigree around him when he got called up, and he's lived up to this point. And it doesn't really feel like the Penguins have that. I mean, they have guys like Guentzel and Rust still, but when you look in the system, they have P.O. Joseph now. But when you look at their system, I mean, outside of guys like, Ligare and Poulin, there's really not a ton of excitement in that pool of prospects right now. And a lot of that has to do with, GMJR's trades over the years, sacrificing first round picks and prospects to get guys to kind of extend the window. And, there's nothing wrong with that. You win 2 cups, you get a little greedy, you try to keep going. You want to build off of that. You never want to you don't want to win and then just decide to cut your payroll by $30-40 million like the Pirates would do after they won in 2015 and then cut the payroll down from the $98 million that it was at. But regardless, it's just a situation where the Penguins need to get younger. The Penguins need to get better, younger talent. And I think GMJR tried that with Kapanen, a guy that they previously had that they paid a premium again to bring back in. But to me, when you look at this system overall, there's not a lot of guys that excite you. And it just seems like, especially now that the Blackhawks might have their goalie situation figured out too. The Penguins seem to have had it until Tristan Jarry kind of slipped up, but, it is early. But regardless, I mean, I think, like you said, the Blackhawks are probably a little bit closer to the Stanley Cup right now than the Penguins.
Yeah, one of my favorite statistics in the entire Rutherford era is that he only has, I think, one player that he drafted, not traded for when they were young, like Marino or Pedersen, or I guess Joseph. He only has one player that he drafted that played over 100 games with the Penguins, and that was Dominic Simone. So that kind of just speaks volume to just, Rutherford wasn't really good at the draft, but again, you want to get greedy and you want to try and trade those first round picks for your Phil Kessels. And that did work out, but still at the same time, it's hurting us right now. And I'm really afraid that if this franchise continues to think and believe that they are contenders, which got a 500 record right now, I don't know if you necessarily are. If you continue to, if the Penguins trade another well, I guess you can't really because we don't even have any anymore. But if the Penguins somehow
trade even more prospects, if they trade Samuel Poulin or Nathan Legare at the draft or at the trade deadline this trade deadline, I will be pretty mad because I don't see it in this team. But then again, I didn't see it in the 2016 team, and look what happened there. It's interesting, and obviously a team can come out of nowhere, but for the most part, I think this team is old, and I think we need not a rebuild, but a retool, like what the Blackhawks are doing. And keep in mind too, some of the players on the Blackhawks that are producing right now, like Lehkonen and Sutter, they weren't even drafted too. They were just young players. They were signed out of the Swiss League. I was actually really interested in that. I was like, what, really? They just straight up signed him. Also kind of a bad example, but the Blackhawks straight up signed Artemi Panarin out of the KHL when he was 25 years old, and he won the Calder over McDavid. You never know how much of an impact a player like that could be to the Penguins. Maybe Buzz Flisbit is out there right now. Steve Dangle likes to call him just random player. Maybe he's out there. Maybe he's in the Penguin system, and maybe he can, turn this franchise not around, but help boost, the depth and youth on this team, because I'm really not seeing it. And something that's really concerning to me is that you've had these success stories in the past. You've had, John Marino last year, Marcus Pettersson 2 years ago, and Pierre-Olivier Joseph this year, and then before then Gensel and Rust. I don't know if Marino is NHL worthy anymore. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but he's played pretty bad this year. And Pettersson also came back in the lineup tonight. He didn't look tremendous by any means. I found it kind of weird how Rutherford traded for a under-the-radar defenseman in 3 straight years, and it was a rookie defenseman for the Penguins that made their NHL debut. Or not NHL debut, they made the team. They got their first contract, and then they kind of didn't have a good season after that. My examples being Marcus Pettersson, came over in that Daniel Sprong trade, looked good, didn't really look great after he got his deal. He's been okay. John Marino comes over in that rip-off from the Oilers. This year hasn't looked so good. I really hope it doesn't happen with Joseph, but those are the players that we need. I'm happy it's happening defensively because, as we mentioned, Letang might be expendable here. But I would like to see more forward depth, and Sam Lafferty's not going to cut it. And Samuel Poulin and Nathan Legare, they're probably not ready yet. So, you just need to draft more and find those random young players. You never know.
Good thoughts all around, guys. We're going to get going here to not really end the show because we still have some stuff going on here, but some kind of quick, rapid questions for you guys. So I'm going to ask both of you the same question, and you guys go in whatever order you want. So who have you been impressed with so far this season for the Penguins?
Pierre-Olivier Joseph. And Brian Rust. I guess I'll go with Brian Rust because what I really feared out of him was that, the Penguins were terribly hurt last year. This year is more just specifically on the defense. Our forwards haven't necessarily been, touched. Rodriguez and McCann are the only ones that have been hurt. Brian Rust is, he had that opportunity last year to be, the goal scoring leader. And I thought that, I didn't necessarily think it was a fluke. I just thought it was, circumstances working the way it was. But this year, he's continuing it, and I'm very happy because Brian Rust, I call him hockey player, first name hockey, last name player, because he does everything that you want from a hockey player, and I might get a Rust jersey because of it.
Yeah, that's a good answer. The P.O. Joseph's the obvious answer. I'm going to go with something a little more, not basic. I'm going to go with Mike Matheson. I seen, his defensive game could definitely use improvement. There's no argument there from me. What I've been most impressed by is his offensive game. I knew he was a good offensive player, but in Florida, I don't think you really got to see the full complement of it. I love the way he skates. I love the way he plays the game on the offensive side. The play the other night he had on Rust's first goal, I think it was with the Valentine's Day game. The pass that Crosby made to him, the little touch pass, the way that Matheson shut the gap when the defender came or went and chased after him hard, and then he made that beautiful through the legs pass, actually through Gensel's legs to Rust. It was just a beautiful play all around. So he's been a guy that's totally impressed me to this point. Like I said, I'd like to see some more out of his defense. I think another guy is Cody Ceci. He's a guy that he had a pretty bad rep coming here. And a lot of people anointed him the Jack Johnson second coming, after getting rid of Jack Johnson. But I think Cody Ceci's been pretty good as far as when he's been in the lineup. He's been nothing special, but he's been much better than advertised. And, I think if everybody on the Pens defense gets going, you can overcome some of the deficiencies that the goalies have had so far. So I think overall, those are two guys that really impressed me at this point and kind of played above my expectations for him.
I hate to bring this up, but Patrick Hornquist, he has 12 points in 13 games, 6 goals, 6 assists, and the Florida Panthers are doing pretty good so far this year. I hate to bring that up, but I just wanted to point that out.
On the flip side of that question, then, who's disappointed you this season?
Cody, I'll let you go first. I got to think of who I actually want to pick because I have a lot of names, but you go ahead and go first.
Yeah, as Owen said earlier, John Marino's been disappointing at this point for sure. I think he's got the talent to kind of turn it around, so I'm not going to completely blast him. I think Jari, for me, has been the biggest disappointment, especially after watching the way that he played last year. He was an all-star. He's finally, they instead of having him battle with Murray, they sent Murray out in the offseason kind of, early on, told Jari, hey, look, this is your crease, own it. And at this point, he's been bad. Something that I did want to point out was, I know the whole, the Mike Bales situation, him being the goalie coach, you're seeing a lot of the same deficiencies, I think, with him as you did Murray. Playing too deep in the net, and just doesn't seem like he has the same confidence. I think, I'm not saying it's a goalie coach problem, but when you're seeing the same problems, that's something you got to keep an eye on. And, from everything I read, Jari played a little more aggressive tonight, wasn't so deep in his net, obviously facing 42 shots. He looked pretty good, but hopefully he can turn a corner. But to this point, I think, he almost had his job, I think, taken away from him by DeSmith again. And then DeSmith had this little injury bug over the past couple of days. Or the sickness bug, sorry. And I don't know. I think he's the guy so far that, going from all-star last year to the statistics that he's had to this point, hopefully tonight's a big turnaround game for him. But to me, he's been the biggest disappointment.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted tonight to be the turnaround game for him. And in the first period, he looked good. Like, he had a couple lucky saves, but, you're a goalie. You have to be lucky sometimes. My pick is not going to be a player. It's going to be Todd Reirden. The power play this year for the Penguins has been abysmal. They went 0 for 21, which is the second longest streak that they have had in Mike Sullivan's tenure on the power play. A bit of this has to do with the trades that we have made, getting rid of guys like Kessel and Hornquist, but you got to be able to replace that. We need a net front presence. And we need a guy on the wall that was as good as Kessel was and can shoot like Kessel was. Gensel and Rust, as much as they are good scoring 5-on-5 goals, I don't know if they're good on the power play. They're not good on the power. No one's good on the power play right now. Malkin and Letang can't enter the zone, to save their lives. And, Sid seems to be the only one that's trying to just carry this power play. Todd Reirden coming back as an assistant coach and being the power play coach was promising because the Penguins struggled with their power play last year. But it hasn't worked this year. And that's something that's just so crucial. Power play goals count the same amount of points as as a normal goal, because it's you need good special teams. The Capitals have the best power play in the league, and we all know what they've been doing. They're set up for the past decade. And yeah, Todd Reardon's my pick. Even though he's not a player, the power play's been terrible for the Pens.
Is Brian Rust elite?
Yes.
Easy enough.
I think he is. Cody?
Yeah, it's gotten to a point now where, like I said earlier, he wasn't necessarily ever considered a big time prospect.
Yeah,
I think
you could make that
now
argument,
it's almost, you could argue that he might even be way underpaid for what he's produced. I mean, I think I didn't get a full look at the stats, but I want to say he's almost at the same pace, if not more points scored over the last like 50 some games as Gensel has. And I think people view Gensel as an elite player, or starting to, at least in this league. I mean, he's a big time scorer, and Rust was on his way to a 40 goal season last year. And he's again leading the league, or leading the team in goals again, albeit with only 5, 6, whatever it is, which is good for, I think his point total is like 35th in the league. So that's your point leader right now for the Penguins. But at the same time, I think he is. I think that he's proven now that, he can be among the league's elite. And I don't think it's a situation where he's being carried by Crosby. I think this is some of the best two-way play we've seen out of Brian Rust to this point. And I think because of that,
yeah, he's 8th in the entire league in shots. I just looked it up right now. Just shot attempts behind Larkin, Nugent Hopkins, Forsberg, Kane, Matthews, McDavid, and Brady Tkachuk is actually at the tied for first there.
John Marino, we talked about him a little bit. Is there a concern for his sophomore slump, or is it just kind of, it is what it is? It's a sophomore slump.
I think in any case where you have a young defenseman, the line that you draw comes to when it hurts your team. Is it costing you? John Marino has cost the Penguins goals this year, and by extension, some losses have been on goals that he could have prevented. It sucks that the contract had to happen before this season. I still think it's a good deal, though. It's a long contract, and hopefully he'll be able to live up to the potential of it. But, Marino, you could make the case, and I know people still love him, and I still am, rooting for this kid. He's only 22. He came fresh out of college. But you got to put your bias aside and realize that he has probably been the worst defenseman for the Penguins this year, more than Letang. And it is really concerning, especially when you just signed him to that new deal. And, you kind of had this happen with Pettersson last year. Pettersson's more of a stable defenseman and less offensive than Marino. But again, as we talked about with Letang, if the Penguins are, in 2-3 years going to move on for Letang, even if that means just letting him walk in free agency, you're going to want Joseph and Marino to take over this decor. And by the way Marino's been playing right now, I don't think that's, likely to happen, because I don't think he's capable of doing it anymore. Hopefully he can rebound.
Yeah, it's certainly a little concerning. I for one, am kind of still on the, he can be the guy train. The physical abilities are there. I mean, he's a great skater. He's really good offensively. Like you said, he's had some defensive lapses this year, but he proved last year that he can absolutely be a great defensive player. I think this happens a lot, and you see this with a lot of guys. You sign a new contract and you feel you have to live up to it, so you're kind of gripping the stick a little more. Your mind's kind of not really at ease. I think you got that contract, now you want to prove that, instead of just, okay, I'm going to lay down and, I got my money, whatever. You want to take your game to another level to prove that you were totally worth the deal. And when you look at the contract, it's not like they paid him a ton of money. I mean, they did pay him a handsome amount of money, but when you compare his contract to, the contract of some of these other defensemen around the league, if if he ends up turning things around and playing at a level that he did last year, I mean, that contract arguably becomes one of the bigger steals in hockey. And I think that he's capable of doing that. So, credit to the Penguins for getting him signed. If he would have came out this year and had a great year, now he might be unaffordable. So they were kind of in a situation where it was make the deal, and live with the consequences. So hopefully, I think we've seen enough out of him that he can absolutely get back to that level that he was at. And I hope that, for the Penguins' sake, that he does.
Honestly, kind of a quick comparison to that. You know who was a player that kind of had a good freshman season, if you will, and then kind of struggled after, he entered the lineup? That's Brian Rust. Once Brian Rust got his contract extension, there were a lot of rumors that he was going to be traded. Thankfully, he didn't. Hopefully that happens with Marino.
I'm going to combine these next two questions because I think they're pretty similar. And I think that the answer for the first question could kind of go into the second one. So will the Penguins make the playoffs this year? And is Mike Sullivan still the coach after this season?
Well, I said before the year I didn't think they would. Nothing that they have done can really push me to change that opinion. And even if it's more so just because of who's in their division, that was a lot of the reason why I made that prediction at the beginning of the year. They've actually been a lot worse than I thought they would have been, and yet they still have a chance. The Islanders, I think that's going to be our biggest competition. I think, like I said, the Flyers, Caps, and Bruins seem like a lock to make it. You'd think that, being that there's only 4 teams making it out of each division this year, that's probably the team we're up against. So I think, at this point, I still don't think they're going to make it. And I think if they do miss the playoffs, you're going to see Mike Sullivan be on the hot seat. It depends on the fashion in which they lose. If they go out with, say, I don't know, 3 wins out of their last 10 games or something to that effect, I think that you will see Sullivan go.
If they get swept like they did against the Islanders, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if they do end up making the playoffs and get swept, or even if they finish out the regular season like 3-7 in their last 10, and that causes them to miss, I think you have to look at, reevaluation. The NHL is a league where coaches are kept for what they do now, not what have you done for me. Mike Sullivan's been a great coach. He's had, he's won 2 cups here. There's nothing more you can ask for. But at some point, even, Joe Quenneville was moved out of Chicago after all he did for them. Every coach just has a shelf life, and it's a lot easier to get rid of the coach than it is the star player. So I think even if it's just for the sake of, and especially with the new bosses being there, you don't hire new GMs and not expect some change, to ripple down from that. So they may reevaluate at the end of the season, decide they don't want to keep them. So I think, depending on the fashion in which they lose the end of the season, then that'll kind of determine whether or not he'll be here. I'll go out on a limb and say he will still be the coach. I just think his seat will be a lot hotter.
Yeah, I'm actually going to disagree with you there, but not too crazy off of what you said. I think the Penguins are going to make the playoffs this year, even though I honestly don't even know if I want them to. Because if I see the Penguins making the playoffs, I see exactly what happened against the Islanders and the Canadiens. They'll be out in the first round. They'll make the playoffs magically this year because look at how we've played so far. We've played arguably 1-2 good games so far, and the Penguins have 14 points and are still tied for 4th in the division. Magically, this team will make the playoffs. Sidney Crosby will carry this team on his back just to get to the playoffs. But, once we get to the postseason, I think it's a completely different story. I think the Penguins missed the playoffs, and I think Sullivan's gone. I like him as a coach. I like him as a person. But, as you mentioned, coaches are much are easier to get rid of than trading Malkin. I think he's gone. And That's my prediction for the Penguins this year. I know I said at the beginning of the year that I saw either the Penguins or the Capitals missing. I didn't think both of those teams would make the playoffs. I think that's different now, but that was my prediction at the beginning of the season. But still, I don't want my team to not make the playoffs, but I think it would not hurt the mindset of this franchise, because 2007 was the last time that the Penguins did not make the playoffs. I was 7 years old. Like, seriously, like, we're spoiled here in Pittsburgh. You can take a step back and evaluate things and get a new coach and go back into the season, maybe after you trade Letang, and the next season, and reevaluate your franchise. I think the Penguins make the playoffs, but they're done in the first round. I think Sullivan gets fired.
Final question for the group. What happens if the Penguins disappoint? I know we kind of touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that, I think Sullivan will be gone. I mean, it depends on your definition of disappoint. I think anything it's kind of a question in itself, is like, what are your expectations for this team this year? I know there's still people that are still bandwagoners from the 2016 and 2017 years that think this team is going to win the Stanley Cup. This team's not going to win the Stanley Cup this year. I'll tell you that right now. I have my reasonable expectations for them, is what I just said. I think they're going to make the postseason and be out in the first round, and that is a disappointment to me. A disappointment for me, like a real disappointment for me would be what I said earlier. If they trade Poulin or Legare or another first and go after this cup again and get swept in the first round again, that would be a disappointment for me. And what happens to that? I think Sullivan will get fired. I think that's the first move that you make.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think, like you said, anything, obviously anything other than winning a cup is a disappointment. That's what you set out to do. But when you look at it through a realistic lens, like you said, losing the first rounds, it's disappointing. I mean, you have Sidney Crosby, you have all this talent on your team, and like I said, Sidney Crosby's won 3 cups. You can't bag on that. His legacy's forever cemented. I don't see them trading him, but I think if they do miss the playoffs, there's going to be changes. I mean, it's not like they didn't fire GMJR, or at least they aren't using that as their reasoning for him leaving. They may have told him, hey, look, we'll keep it under the radar. But regardless, he left, so they had to hire somebody. And this new regime is an older, Hextall and Burke have been in the league for a while. Hextall, obviously, this is only his second GM position, but Berkey's had a lot of time in the league, and he prefers, it's been proven he prefers these bigger, teams. And I think you're going to see the Penguins shift more towards that. I think they've been soft for far too long, and I think adding a little bit of grit here would definitely help this team. I'm not certainly clamoring for guys like,
Ryan
Steve
Reeves.
Downey and those types of players. Yeah, Ryan Reeves. I mean, you can have, like, the Lightning are a good example. Just looking at their D-core last year, I mean, they were all massive, towering defensemen. And they were still yet good hockey players, and they comprised a good top 6 for Tampa Bay and took them to, a Stanley Cup. So, obviously the Penguins were the product a couple years ago with the speed game, but I think that, teams have figured out there's other ways to win. I mean, you can combine speed with other things and win. And I think that you're going to see a much different philosophy from Hextall and Burke. And, whether that means Sullivan's gone, whether that means Malkin's traded, Letang's traded, it'll be interesting to see exactly what they kind of do. But yeah, I mean, if the Penguins disappoint, I think you're going to see big changes just solely on the fact there's 2 new bosses here, and they may just want to make a philosophical organizational change.
Okay, well, that's it for the rapid fire questions. And unless you guys have anything else, that's that's it for our show tonight. I don't really have any parting words except for good luck to the Penguins. I hope all their wishes and dreams come true. So to close us out, just kind of some shout outs to some social medias and whatnot. Owen has his YouTube channel. It's just his name, Owen Krepps. We're on Twitter at PGH Sports Castle. Cody has his kind of like secondary outlet, Let's Talk Pens. I'm on Twitter at Rachael Kriger. Owen's on Twitter, Krepps85. Cody is on Twitter at Cody_625. And don't forget that our podcast here is on all major platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Definitely check us out by searching our name. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. The feedback is important. Any reviews posted will help make the podcast more visible to listeners. Feel free to send us any questions, podcast prompts, topics, whatnot. And for myself, for Owen, for Cody, thanks for joining us. We'll see you in a couple weeks.